Hello, my friends. I am speaking you tonight to you tonight because I've been seeing and hearing from people about the distress, spiritual distress over what happened in Texas yesterday, the school shooting. I did post on my personal Facebook page a video from Russell Brand that I think addresses a lot of the societal, cultural, human responses and reactions to what's happened again. And we know it happens again and again and again. And for some reason, our society needs to have such horrors happen in order to remember who we are, and remember that we belong to one another, and remember that we need to focus our attention and energies on creating the more beautiful world that our hearts know is possible. So I wanted to talk to you for a few minutes tonight and share with you about the things that I think would be helpful. Of course, we have the capacity as mostly ministers in our group, but everyone in our group to turn our attention to the resources that we have spiritually to help um, in a energetic way. Some of those resources have to do with prayer and blessing and using our prayer temple in Avalon to send a magnified blessing to that area and to those specific families and to those communities and actually across the planet, because this kind of horrific experience has a ripple effect that goes out across the planet um, and makes people despair. Makes people despair for the lack of safety, the lack of love and compassion. But we, as servants of the Christ, are obligated to hold the truth that's higher than the horror, um, which is that all things can come together for good in God. And I don't say that lightly or dismissive of the real torture and pain that these people are feeling. I say it because as ministers, our job and our vow is to give our hearts, let our compassion for the suffering of the world break our hearts open. Let our hearts bleed out all of our sorrow for the sake of those who suffer. And that is Jesus' example, to say, I give everything in my heart. So if you're finding yourself heartbroken and pain in your heart and weary and teary, that is an appropriate response to what you see happening in the world and in this particular incident that's so fresh for all of us. Um, and that compassion and that brokenheartedness is you laying down your life for your friends or for humankind, for those who are suffering, for that community, and the many, many other communities that have had this happen. Um, I don't want to talk about the politics of it, but I want to talk about the transforming or transmuting of the energy. So, if you remember at retreat in the fall, we talked about how we could use the energy of anything that we find ourselves feeling to tune into all of the world's experience of that feeling. So, in this case, the feeling of horror, of grief, of maybe even despair. And we can feel what we feel personally and then look at all of the suffering in the world associated with this event. And there's a lot of it. You know, families, communities, extended families, friends, um, everyone who has a child, everyone who wants to have a child. It puts fear and instability in the heart of pretty much every human being. Fear of many, many things that could come in many, many directions. You know, guns, mental health, unstable communities, poverty, and lack of unity, and divisiveness, and violence in our culture and in our media. So many, many things that cause fear in people. So our job as ministers is to take that fear into our heart, take that sorrow, that grief, that horror into our heart, and take as much of it as we can, and then let our hearts break open with it. So as we siphon it off from the world mind, as we siphon off as much as we can here and in Avalon, siphoning off the heartache and the pain and the trauma, and use our own being and our collective being in Avalon with all of our helpers there to take that heartache, hearing the angels weep, we ourselves weeping and feeling our hearts torn apart with the suffering, and allowing our being to be a channel for the suffering to transform it so that it can be relieved from the people who are suffering. We can send that same light to the souls of those 21 people, it looks like now, who have died from that horrible incident, including the perpetrator, because that is the way of the Christ, is to say every single soul needs to be saved and loved. That's a hard thing to do when you look at the horror that's there. Um, and Murderers are made, they're not born. So we don't know the circumstance of that young man and what was happening in his life that would compel him to do such a horrific thing. So, as Jesus said on the cross, we have to be emulating him, saying, "Forgive them, Father, they know not what they do." In the case of this young man, I mean, he's really a child. He's 18 years old, really a child. You can't imagine what happened to him or what influences he's had that felt like the thing to do, or he was compelled to do in some way. So this is really hard stuff, and it's actually where our ministry takes us to say, I'm giving my heart over to the sorrows of the world and letting my heart break open. Now, certainly we can do, prayers for the souls of those who died, releasing them. We can do prayers for the comfort of the family and friends. We can do prayers that our world wakes up and stops being violent and doing this harm that makes so many people suffer. It seems to be a cycle that is unending, but we have to, as ministers, hold fast to a higher truth that says that peace will prevail, love will prevail. And in the face of something like this, it can become despairing that how could it possibly be? So if we, as the lovers of the Christ, are despairing, then imagine the despair that's happening in the world. So as best you can, hold on to the suffering, but not the despair. Transform the suffering from your heart and the hearts of anyone that you can gather into yourself. Sit in Avalon, see the light coming down, let your heart break open, and in the compassion, you'll have great fervor for your prayer and blessing. It will be, in your pain, your prayer is magnified, your blessing is magnified. So that's what you can do with that pain. If you're feeling overcome or overwhelmed by it, let yourself sit for a time, let your heart break, and in that heartbreak, the idea of what it's like for those children and teachers who died traumatically, their loved ones, their parents, their spouses, their children of the teachers, the heartache is really hard to imagine how that would be if it were your heartache. And we're asked by Jesus to take on that heartache, to transform it in ourselves to a higher knowing that says that in spite of this horror, in spite of this pain, love is still real. Love is still true. Peace is still possible. Now, I know that's a heroic effort when your heart is broken, and it is the effort that we're asked to participate in order to transform and transmute the pain of this situation into something higher. We can think about it in a similar way in Ukraine, where innocent people are being killed for the sake of a political cause, and that the horrors of that, and that those people continue to strive to maintain their culture and their country in spite of that destruction. So as ministers of the Christ, we too have to hold fast to the truth that only love is real, and that we choose love, and that we choose it over and over again, even in the face of such horrible things that happen and such horrible things that humans do to one another on the planet. So I encourage you to use the pain that you have to fuel your prayers and blessings, to magnify your prayers and blessings in your heart, in Avalon, feeling the heart of all of the other ministers doing the same thing. And when we meet tomorrow for our Ascension Thursday gathering, we will do that together. We will do a transformative exercise together in Avalon. But in the meantime, you can go there, and I encourage you to have that be the place you go to whenever your heart feels broken by anything that's happening in the world. Bring your own broken heart there. Bring the broken heart of the parents, the communities, the world. Bring your broken heart over everything that's happening in the world and bless it mightily, fervently, with the compassion and pain that you feel in your heart as the fuel for that prayer and blessing. And pour out your heart to the heavens, asking on behalf of all of those people. You are an intercessor, you are a mediator as a minister. Use your heart, your prayer, your blessing to mediate this pain, to transmute it for the sake of those who are suffering unbearable sorrow, unbearable shock and tragedy. And let your heart break with them. And it won't be unbearable to you because you have God. You are God. You have the knowledge of the truth of love, the certainty of the truth of love, in spite of what it looks like on the earth. So we really need to lean hard into the knowing that we've gathered over this time of Lent, reading the Way of Mastery. I and my Father are one. And as Jesus would say, I want it. I want suffering alleviated for those who are suffering. I want it. I want peace on this earth. I want it. I want love to reign. I want it. I want people who are compelled to do horrific things to get help. I want it. And in the brokenness of your heart, the fervor and command of your prayer and your blessing is, I want it. Alleviation of suffering, human beings to be human and humane, love to be real. I want the more beautiful world that my heart knows is possible. And you want it more and more and more and more. That takes concentration and energy and the willingness to transmute that energy of suffering into fuel for blessing. So I encourage you to do that whenever you're feeling the pangs of it, whenever it crosses your mind and your heart. I know it's very hard to feel what many of you are feeling at a very deep level. The closer you get to God, the more your heart breaks for what breaks the heart of Jesus and Mary. So let it break your heart. Let it break your heart. And then pray. In that brokenness is your strength. And that brokenness is the power of your prayer and blessing for everyone who is suffering and for our world that cultivates and creates people that are so desperate as to do such a thing as what happened there in Texas. So you can look up the names of the people that died and pray their names individually. You can do the Akal prayer, which I know that Reverend Hannah has had some versions of that, but you can find it. I am fond of the one by Simrit Kaur. You can look that up. It's called Akal, A-K-A-L. Akal means deathless. And we remember that we can have hope and peace in our hearts because our beings are deathless, even though our bodies can die, and sometimes in horrible ways, as what happened yesterday. So we hold fast to the deathlessness. And if you sing the Akal to the souls of those children and those teachers, it will help them to travel on. It will help them to go on even in the face of such tragedy. Generally speaking, the chaos of the tragedy and the intensity of the suffering of those who died and those who love those who died will take a few days to settle into what can those souls do now. So my blessing is going to be on the souls of those who have died in this tragedy, to comfort them, to let them know that they're, what's happened, and to help them reunite with their higher self as quickly as they can, and for the parents, friends, relatives, siblings of those children and the relatives and loved ones of the teachers, that they also would be comforted, that their souls would be comforted in this tragic loss that they've had. Violent death is such the antithesis of our humanity and our nature. So feel with them, feel for them, and pray and bless with all that you've got in your heart all that you've got as you feel the brokenness of the hearts of so many, many people. So I'll leave you with that tonight, and tomorrow night when we have our Zoom meeting for Ascension Thursday, we will go to Avalon together and do that work together. But in the meantime, give your heart over to the heartache, pray and bless, sing the Akal for those souls, and keep the faith. We have to keep the energy of the faith in God and in goodness in order to pave the way for other people to find their way to that faith. That is our job and our vow as ministers, to hold what's true at the forefront of our mind in spite of all evidence to the contrary that arises in the external world around us, to hold it true. And that, I know that's heroic, and now this is a huge strengthening process, and I send my blessings to all of you as you go into that, into your own brokenheartedness, and into doing your part to transform that and transmute that for all of humankind. So blessings to you tonight. I will see you in Avalon, and I will be here tomorrow night for class, and we will continue to do that work together. Deep peace to you and to the souls of those who died and to the souls of those who love them.